The glass tower of Sterling and Hart pierced the city skyline, its mirrored facade reflecting the dawn's golden haze. Inside, the lobby buzzed with the quiet efficiency of wealth. Marble floors gleamed under crystal chandeliers, and executives in tailored suits moved with the precision of a well-rehearsed symphony. Elise Harper, the receptionist, sat behind the sleek front desk, her presence as unassuming as the soft click of her keyboard. At 26, she was a wisp of a woman, petite, with chestnut hair tied back in a low bun and eyes that seemed to carry the weight of unspoken thoughts. Her navy blazer, borrowed from a thrift shop, hung slightly loose on her frame, and her packed lunch sat in a canvas bag beneath her desk. To the high-powered world of Sterling and Hart, she was invisible, a shadow who answered phones and smiled politely at those who never remembered her name. It was a crisp Friday morning, and the air felt sharp with possibility. The lobby hummed with the usual parade of egos, men in cufflinks worth more than Elise's rent, women in heels that echoed like gunshots on the marble. They barely glanced at her, their conversations a blur of stock prices and boardroom strategies. Elise didn't mind. She preferred the quiet, the space to observe without being seen. Her fingers danced over the keyboard, scheduling meetings and routing calls, while her mind wandered to the sign language lessons she practiced late at night, her laptop glowing in her tiny apartment. She had learned it not for a job or a resume, but for the community center where she hoped to volunteer one day, to connect with those who lived in a world of silence. At 10:09, the glass doors swung open, and a hush fell over the lobby. Margaret Sterling, the mother of CEO Julian Sterling, entered in a wheelchair pushed by a stoic aide. Her silver hair was pinned elegantly, her pale blue shawl draped over her shoulders like a whisper of royalty. Her hands, delicate but trembling with age, rested in her lap. Margaret was deaf, a fact known but rarely acknowledged by the staff, who treated her presence like an inconvenience, a relic of the Sterling legacy to be nodded at and ignored. The executives averted their eyes, their chatter faltering as if her silence might contaminate their polished world. Elise watched, her heart tightening at how they dismissed her, as if Margaret were a piece of furniture rather than a woman who had raised a titan. No one moved to greet her, no one knew how, except Elise. She stood, smoothing her blazer, and crossed the lobby with a quiet grace that belied her racing pulse. Kneeling beside Margaret's wheelchair, she met the older woman's eyes, clear, piercing, and unexpectedly warm. Elise's hands rose, moving with the fluidity of someone who had practiced for hours, not for show but for sincerity. "Good morning, Mrs. Sterling. You look radiant today," she signed, her fingers carefully shaping each word. A small smile curved her lips, tentative but genuine, as if offering not just a greeting but a piece of herself. The lobby froze. Heads turned, conversations stalled. An executive holding a coffee mug paused mid-sip, his brow furrowing. A woman in a crimson dress whispered to her colleague, "What's she doing?" Another scoffed softly. Probably saw it in a movie. The air thickened with curiosity and judgment, but Elise didn't notice. She was focused on Margaret, whose face lit up, her eyes crinkling with a joy that surprised her. Margaret's hands, trembling but sure, signed back. "Thank you." No one said that in a long time. Elise translated softly for the aide, her voice barely above a whisper, but it carried in the silent room. 3 meters away, Julian Sterling stood, unnoticed until that moment. At 32, he was a man who commanded spaces without trying. Tall, broad-shouldered, with storm-gray eyes and a jawline that could cut glass. His graphite suit was immaculate, his presence a gravitational pull that made people straighten their spines and lower their voices. He ran Sterling and Hart's multi-billion-dollar empire with the precision of a chess grandmaster, every move calculated, every glance deliberate. But now he was still, his gaze fixed on Elise as if seeing her for the first time. Her hands, her poise, the way she knelt beside his mother weren't just kindness. It was defiance, a quiet rebellion against the room's indifference. Elise rose, her cheeks flushed not from embarrassment, but from the moment's weight. She hadn't meant to stand out, she never did. She had only wanted to offer Margaret the dignity no one else had bothered to give. But the room's eyes were on her now, and she felt their scrutiny like a physical touch. Margaret reached for her hand, her grip surprisingly strong, and signed again, "You remind me of someone." Elise's breath caught, but a voice cut through the air before she could ask who. "What did you say to her?" Julian's tone wasn't angry, but it wasn't soft either. It was deep, edged with something that demanded an answer. Elise turned, her heart pounding, and met his eyes. They were intense, searching, like a man trying to solve a puzzle that had suddenly become personal. She swallowed, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. "I said she looked radiant today." Julian blinked, just once, and glanced at his mother, whose smile hadn't faded. Margaret signed again, her movements slower, deliberate. Elise translated, her voice softer now. She said no one's called her radiant since her husband passed. The words landed like a stone in still water, rippling through the lobby. The executives shifted uncomfortably, their coffee mugs forgotten. Elise looked at the floor, her face warm, not from shame, but from the realization that she had done something no one else had dared. A murmur broke the silence, low and cruel. "Why would she learn sign language?" someone whispered. "Trying to impress the boss?" another muttered. The words stung, but Elise didn't flinch. She stood straight, her small frame unshakable, and met Margaret's eyes again. The older woman's smile widened, radiant in its own right, and she squeezed Elise's hand as if sealing a silent pact. Julian stepped closer, his presence silencing the whispers. He didn't speak, but his gaze lingered on Elise, unreadable yet piercing. The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for his next move. His assistant, a sharp-faced woman named Cassandra Vale, stepped forward, her voice clipped. "Mr. Sterling, the investor call is in 10 minutes. We need to move." Julian didn't budge. His eyes flicked to Elise, then to his mother, who still smiled at the young receptionist. Finally he spoke, his voice low and deliberate. "Elise." She looked up, startled by the sound of her name in his mouth. "Join us," he said, heavy but straightforward with intent. The room gasped. Cassandra's composure faltered, her eyes narrowing. "Sir, she's the receptionist." Julian didn't repeat himself. He didn't need to. Margaret, grinning quietly, held Elise's hand tighter. It was decided. In the elevator, no one spoke. Elise stood at the back, her thin dress and borrowed blazer stark against the sea of $1,000 suits. Julian stood beside his mother, arms crossed, his eyes occasionally flicking to Elise, as if trying to unravel a mystery he hadn't known existed. The doors closed, and the ascent began, carrying them toward a boardroom where Elise, for the first time, would be more than a shadow. But as the numbers ticked upward, she felt the weight of the locket in her bag, a gift unasked for, and the whisper of something larger, a story she hadn't meant to step into, but one that was already rewriting her life. The elevator doors slid open, revealing the top-floor boardroom of Sterling and Hart, a cathedral of glass and steel that seemed to float above the city. Elise Harper stepped out, her borrowed blazer feeling thinner against the weight of the executive's stares. The air was crisp with the scent of polished wood and fresh coffee, the table lined with men and women whose suits cost more than her monthly rent. Julian Sterling led the way, his mother Margaret at his side in her wheelchair, her serene smile starkly contrasting the room's tension. Elise followed, clutching her notepad, her heart thudding like a metronome. She was a receptionist, not a boardroom player. Yet here she was, invited by the CEO after her unexpected sign language greeting to his mother. Still tucked in her bag, the locket felt like a secret she hadn't asked to carry. The boardroom buzzed with low murmurs as they entered. Eyes flicked toward Elise, some curious, others sharp with disdain. She sat near the coffee tray, as far from the center as she could manage, her pen poised over her notepad, though no one had asked her to take notes. Julian stood at the head of the table, commanding silence without effort. At 32, he was a study in control, tall, with storm-gray eyes and a jaw that seemed carved from stone. His voice, when he spoke, was smooth but unyielding, launching into the agenda with the precision of a conductor. Yet Elise noticed his gaze drift toward her, brief but deliberate, as if she were a variable he hadn't yet solved. The meeting discussed revenue projections, shareholder concerns, and a new acquisition in Singapore. Elise scribbled notes, her handwriting neat but her mind elsewhere. She replayed the lobby moment, her hands signing to Margaret, the older woman's radiant smile, Julian's piercing question, "What did you say to her?" The memory warmed her, but the executive's earlier whispers stung. Why would she learn sign language, trying to impress the boss? She tightened her grip on her pen, pushing the words away. She hadn't learned sign language for them. She'd learned it for herself, for the quiet nights when she dreamed of making a difference, however slight. A sharp voice snapped her back to the room. Cassandra Vale, the chief communications officer, leaned forward, her blonde hair sleek as a blade. Cassandra's not just sharp, she's a weapon, Elise thought, recalling the office gossip about her ruthless efficiency. "Mr. Sterling, if I may," Cassandra said, her tone polished but edged. "The optics of this quarter's PR campaign need refinement. The media's sniffing for weaknesses, especially with the gala tomorrow." Her eyes flicked to Elise, a fleeting glance that carried a warning. "We can't afford distractions." Julian nodded, his expression unreadable. "Agreed, refine the messaging by Monday." He turned to the CFO, shifting topics, but Elise felt Cassandra's gaze linger, like a predator sizing up prey. She forced herself to focus, jotting down figures she barely understood, her hand steady despite the knot in her chest. The meeting broke for lunch and Margaret, defying Cassandra's brisk gesture to leave, signed to Elise, "Join me in the lounge." Elise hesitated, glancing at Julian, who gave a slight nod. Cassandra's lips tightened, but she said nothing. The lounge was a quieter space, bathed in natural light, with orchids lining the windowsills. Margaret sat by a glass table, her wheelchair angled toward the city skyline. Elise set down a tray of chicken salad sandwiches and chamomile tea, her movements careful, almost reverent. She unwrapped a homemade shortbread cookie from her bag and offered it to Margaret, who smiled and signed, "You're thoughtful. Like someone I knew." Elise's heart skipped. "Who?" She signed back, but before Margaret could answer, Cassandra swept in, her heels clicking like a countdown. "Mr. Sterling needs you now," Cassandra said, her voice sweet but her eyes cold. Elise stood, smoothing her skirt, and followed her down a glass hallway. The city sprawled below, indifferent to the tension coiling in her chest. At the end of the corridor, Julian stood by a window, hands in his pockets, his back to them. The room smelled faintly of cedar and clean linen, a private office reserved for the Sterling family. "Come in," he said without turning. Elise stepped inside, her breath shallow. Had she overstepped? Was this about the locket? Julian turned, holding a small silver locket, its rose engraving catching the light. "She wants you to have it," he said, his voice low, almost reverent. "My mother doesn't give things away lightly." Elise stared, her fingers brushing the cool metal as he handed it to her. Inside was a faded photograph of a young woman, her eyes hauntingly familiar. "Is this her sister?" Elise asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Julian nodded. "Rose. She died young." His tone carried a weight Elise couldn't place, like a story half buried. Before she could respond, Cassandra's voice sliced through. "She's manipulating you, Julian." Elise flinched, turning to see Cassandra in the doorway, her posture rigid, her eyes narrowed. "She's been here 3 months, and now she's cozying up to your mother and walking off with family heirlooms?" Elise's hand dropped from the locket, her cheeks burning. "I didn't ask for," she began, but Cassandra cut her off. "I know exactly what you didn't ask for. Girls like you, quiet, harmless, until you're not." Julian's jaw tightened. "Enough, Cassandra." His voice was steel, low and lethal. Even Cassandra paused, her breath catching for a fraction of a second. "I'll handle it," he added, softer but firm. He turned to Elise, his expression unreadable but not unkind. "Take your lunch break." Elise nodded, clutching the locket as she left, her steps quick but steady. In the lounge, Margaret had dozed off, her shawl slipping slightly. Elise sat beside her, placing the locket on the table, its silver glinting like a promise or a warning. Rain began to fall outside, soft at first, then steady, casting shadows across the glass. She nibbled her second shortbread cookie, the familiar buttery taste grounding her. She broke off a piece and left it on a napkin for Margaret, a small gesture of care. The silence was comforting, a stark contrast to the boardroom's edge. Elise tucked the locket into a silk handkerchief and left it in her desk drawer as her shift ended. She wasn't ready to wear it, not yet. She avoided the crowded elevator, waiting until the lobby cleared. As she passed the security gate, a young intern, nervous and wide-eyed, called her name. "Miss Harper?" She held out a small bouquet of peonies, slightly wilted but vibrant. "These were delivered for you." Elise blinked. "For me?" The intern nodded, handing her a card. Elise unfolded it, her fingers trembling. "You didn't have to speak, but you did. Thank you. J.S." Her heart skipped. She held the card, the peony's faint scent mingling with the rain-soaked air. For a moment, she smiled, unaware of the eyes watching her from the shadows of the lobby. Cassandra, her expression unreadable, her phone glowing with a photo of Elise holding the flowers. The next morning, Elise wore a blush-pink blouse, modest but new, and tucked her hair back with a pearl clip. The locket remained in her bag, a weight she wasn't ready to carry openly. The office buzzed with whispers about the flowers, the elevator invite, the locket. Cassandra's glare was sharper now, her silence louder than words. Julian hadn't arrived yet, but Elise felt a shift, a sense that something had begun, and today would test whether she could hold her ground in a story she hadn't chosen but couldn't escape. Elise Harper stepped into the Sterling and Hart lobby on Saturday morning, the weight of the previous day's events clinging to her like the damp chill of the city's early rain. Her blush-pink blouse felt like a small act of courage, its soft hue contrasting the steely sheen of the marble floors. The silver locket, still tucked in her canvas bag, seemed to pulse with a quiet significance she couldn't yet name. Yesterday's moments replayed in her mind, her sign-language greeting to Margaret Sterling, Julian's intense gaze, the peonies with his initials on the card. But Cassandra Vale's sharp words lingered too, a warning that kindness could be mistaken for calculation in a place like this. The lobby was quieter than usual, and the weekend skeleton crew moved with subdued purpose. Elise settled behind her desk, her fingers brushing the drawer where she'd left the locket. She hadn't worn it, not yet. It felt too heavy, too tied to a story she didn't fully understand. Margaret's radiant smile, Julian's invitation to the boardroom, and the whispers of "why her?" swirled in her thoughts, making her question her place in this gleaming world. She opened her email, expecting routine memos, but found a single message from an unknown sender. The subject line read, "Be careful with gifts." Her pulse quickened as she clicked. Inside, a single line, "Not every heirloom is a blessing. Ask about Rose." No signature, just a chill that settled in her chest. Before she could process it, the glass doors swung open, and Margaret Sterling arrived, her wheelchair gliding smoothly under the aide's steady hands. Her silver hair was pinned neatly, her pale green shawl catching the light like sea glass. Elise stood, her hands moving instinctively. "Good morning, Mrs. Sterling." "I hope you're well today," she signed, her smile genuine but tinged with unease. Margaret's eyes softened and she sighed. "You're here early. Sit with me." Elise glanced at the aide, who nodded, and followed them to the private lounge, her bag slung over her shoulder, the locket inside like a hidden heartbeat. The lounge was a haven of soft light and orchids, the city's hum muted by thick glass. Margaret gestured to a chair and Elise sat, setting her bag carefully beside her. Margaret signed, "You didn't wear it," her gaze flicking to Elise's neck. Elise hesitated, her fingers brushing her collarbone. "It feels important. I don't know if I should." Margaret's smile was knowing, almost conspiratorial. "It's yours now. She wanted you to have it." Elise's brow furrowed. "She?" Margaret's hands paused, then moved slowly. "My sister, Rose. She was like you, quiet but strong." Elise's breath caught. The email's warning echoed. "Ask about Rose." Before she could sign a question, the door opened and Julian Sterling stepped in, his presence shifting the air. His charcoal suit was crisp, but his eyes carried a shadow of sleeplessness. "Mother," he said aloud, then signed, "You're up early." His gaze landed on Elise, lingering a moment too long, as if searching for something. "Elise," he added, his voice softer, "I didn't expect you here." She stood, smoothing her blouse. "Mrs. Sterling invited me." Margaret signed to Julian, her movements quick and pointed. He translated for Elise, his tone neutral, but his eyes intense. She says, "You remind her of Rose." And she doesn't say that lightly. Elise's hand drifted to her bag, where the locket rested. "Who was Rose?" she asked, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. Julian's jaw tightened, and Margaret's hand stilled. After a beat, she signed, "My sister. She died young." The locket was hers. Elise swallowed, the email's words now a drumbeat.
"How did she die?"
Margaret's eyes darkened, and she sighed slowly. "A fire. Long ago. No one talks about it." Julian shifted, his posture stiffening. "It was an accident," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Elise sensed a fracture in his words, a truth buried beneath years of silence. Before she could press further, Cassandra Vale's voice cut through the room like a blade. "Julian, we need you. The gala's logistics are a mess." She stood in the doorway, her tailored black dress as sharp as her tone, her eyes flicking to Elise with thinly veiled contempt. And the receptionist shouldn't be in private meetings. Julian's gaze didn't waver from Elise. "She's here at my mother's request." Cassandra's smile was razor-thin. "Of course, but optics matter, especially tonight." She turned to Elise, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "You're coming to the gala, I hear. Don't expect it to be a fairy tale." Elise's cheeks flushed, but she held Cassandra's stare. "I don't expect anything. I was invited." Cassandra's laugh was sharp, and she swept out, leaving a chill in her wake. Julian turned to Elise, his expression softer but unreadable. "You don't have to go tonight," he said. "It's not your world." Elise met his eyes, her voice quiet but firm. "Maybe it's not, but your mother asked me to be there." Margaret smiled, signing, "Wear the locket for Rose." Elise nodded, her resolve hardening. "I will." Julian's lips twitched, a faint smile breaking through his armor. "Then I'll see you there." He left, his footsteps echoing down the hall, and Elise felt the weight of the locket grow heavier, as if it carried not just Rose's memory, but her secrets. Back at her desk, Elise opened her bag and pulled out the locket, its silver rose glinting under the lobby's lights. She opened it, studying the faded photo of Rose. Her eyes, her tilt of the head, so like her own. The resemblance was uncanny, stirring a mix of curiosity and dread. The anonymous email gnawed at her. "Ask about Rose." She slipped the locket into her pocket, deciding to wear it tonight, not for the gala's glamour, but for Margaret's trust. As she typed up the day's schedule, a junior assistant approached, nervous, holding a small box. "Miss Harper, this was left for you." Elise opened it to find a single pressed rose, its petals brittle but vibrant. A card tucked beneath read, "You're stepping into her shadow. Be careful. J.S." Her heart skipped. Julian? Or someone else using his initials? She scanned the lobby, but no one met her gaze. The assistant lingered, whispering, "People are talking about you and Mr. Sterling. Be careful with Cassandra. She's intense." Elise nodded, tucking the rose and card into her drawer. "Thanks for the heads up." By noon, the office buzzed with gala preparations, whispers of gowns, guest lists, and power plays. Elise worked quietly, her mind on Rose. She searched the company's archives on her computer, finding a brief mention of a fire in 1978. A Sterling and Hart warehouse. One casualty, Rose Sterling, 24. No details, no follow-up. The silence around it felt deliberate, like a wound the company had cauterized. At 2 p.m., Margaret's aide wheeled her back into the lobby, and she signed to Elise. "Come to my suite before you leave. I have something for you." Elise followed, her steps tentative. In the suite, Margaret handed her a folded letter, yellowed with age, its edges worn. "Read it later," she signed. "It's from Rose." Elise's throat tightened. "Why me?" she signed back. Margaret's eyes were steady. "Because you listen." As Elise left, clutching the letter, she passed Cassandra in the hall, who paused, her gaze flicking to the letter. "Careful, Elise," she said, her voice low. "Some stories are better left buried." Elise didn't flinch. Some stories may need to be told. Elise Harper sat at her desk in the Sterling and Hart lobby, the Saturday afternoon light filtering through the towering glass windows, casting long shadows across the marble floor. The pressed rose from the mysterious package rested in her drawer, its brittle petals a silent echo of the locket's engraving. The anonymous email, "Be careful with gifts, ask about Rose," and the card signed J.S. gnawed at her, their warnings intertwining with Margaret Sterling's cryptic gift of Rose's letter. Elise's fingers hovered over her keyboard, her routine tasks feeling distant as her mind churned. The gala loomed, just hours away, and the weight of the locket in her pocket felt like a tether to a past she hadn't chosen. The lobby was quieter now, the weekend staff thinning as the day waned. Elise's blush-pink blouse clung to her, its soft hue a small defiance against the office's cold elegance. She glanced at the clock, 3:17 p.m., and then at the elevator, half expecting Julian Sterling to appear. His invitation to the gala, delivered via an ivory envelope, sat unopened in her bag, its weight as heavy as the locket. She hadn't decided if attending was bravery or folly. But Margaret's words, "Wear the locket," for Rose, echoed, urging her forward. A soft thud interrupted her thoughts. A cream-colored envelope lay on her desk, her name, Elise Harper, scrawled in sharp cursive across its front. No stamp, no return address. Her pulse quickened as she opened it, revealing a single typed sentence. "Careful, Elise. Not every gift comes without strings." Her breath caught. She scanned the lobby, but the few staff members were absorbed in their tasks, a janitor polishing the brass fixtures, an intern sorting mail. No one watched her, yet the air felt thick with unseen eyes. Elise tucked the note into her drawer beside the pressed rose, her fingers trembling. The warnings were escalating, each one sharper, more personal. Who's doing this? She wondered. Cassandra? The chief communications officer's earlier barb, "Some stories are better left buried," had carried a personal venom, but this note felt different, quieter, like a whisper from someone who knew more than they should. She opened her email again, half hoping for another clue, but found only routine messages. The company archives she'd searched earlier offered little beyond the stark fact of Rose Sterling's death in a 1978 fire. The silence around it was deafening, a void begging to be filled. The elevator dinged, and Margaret Sterling emerged, her wheelchair gliding under her aide's steady hands. Her silver hair gleamed under the chandelier light, and her pale green shawl was a soft contrast to the lobby's hard edges. Elise stood, her hands moving instinctively. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Sterling. I hope you're ready for tonight," she signed, forcing a smile despite the knot in her chest. Margaret's eyes crinkled and she signed back, "Call me Margaret, and yes, I'm ready." "Are you?" Elise hesitated, her fingers faltering. "I'm trying," she signed, her honesty surprising her. Margaret gestured to the private suite, and Elise followed, clutching her bag with the locket and Rose's letter inside. The suite was a sanctuary of soft whites and orchids, the city's hum muted by thick glass. Margaret sat by a window overlooking the skyline, her hands folded. "You got my letter," she signed, her eyes searching Elise's face. Elise nodded, pulling the yellowed paper from her bag. "I haven't read it yet. It feels private." Margaret's smile was gentle but firm. "It is, but it's yours now. Please read it before the gala." Elise unfolded the letter, its edges brittle, the ink faded but legible. Dated 1978, it began. "To whoever finds this, I loved someone I shouldn't have. If I'm gone, it wasn't an accident." Her heart pounded. Rose's words were a plea, a warning, written in a hurried script that betrayed fear. "I trusted him, but he chose power over me. The fire will come." Elise's hands trembled as she folded the letter, her eyes meeting Margaret's. "What happened to her?" she signed, her movements slow, deliberate. Margaret's hands moved with a heavy grace. "Rose was my sister, my shield. She loved a man tied to this company. He betrayed her, and she died for it." Her eyes glistened, but her voice was steady when she spoke aloud. "The fire wasn't an accident." Elise's throat tightened. "Who was he?" she sighed, but before Margaret could answer, the door opened, and Julian Sterling stepped in, his presence filling the room like a storm cloud. "Mother," he said, signing simultaneously, "you're still here." His gaze shifted to Elise, softening for a moment before hardening again. "Elise, you're spending a lot of time with my mother." His tone wasn't accusing, but it carried a question. Elise stood, her voice calm despite her racing pulse. "She invited me. I'm honored to be here." Julian's eyes flicked to the letter in her hand, and his jaw tightened. "What's that?" Margaret signed quickly, and Julian translated, his voice low. "She says it's roses. She wants you to know her story." Elise clutched the letter, its words burning in her mind. "I'm starting to," she said softly. Julian's expression was unreadable, but his eyes held a flicker of something, curiosity perhaps, or unease. "Be careful with that," he said, nodding at the letter. "Old stories can stir up trouble." Before Elise could respond, Cassandra Vale swept into the room, her black dress clinging to her like armor, her heels clicking a warning. "Julian, the gala team needs you now. The press is already circling." Her eyes landed on Elise, narrowing. "And you're still here, playing family confidant?" Elise's cheeks flushed, but she held her ground. "I'm here because Margaret asked me to be." Cassandra's smile was sharp. "Charming, but don't mistake kindness for a seat at the table." Julian's voice cut through, low and firm. "Cassandra, enough." She froze, her composure slipping for a fraction of a second. "I'll handle this," he added, his gaze flicking to Elise. "Get ready for tonight." Elise nodded, slipping the letter into her bag beside the locket. Cassandra's voice followed her as she left the suite, low and venomous. "You're out of your depth, Elise. Heirlooms come with debts." Back at her desk, Elise sat, the lobby's hum a distant buzz. She pulled out the locket, its silver rose catching the light. Rose's letter and the anonymous notes formed a puzzle she couldn't yet solve, but their urgency was undeniable. She opened her drawer, intending to store the locket, when another envelope caught her eye and slipped beneath her notepad. Her name was scrawled in the same sharp cursive. She opened it, her hand steady despite her racing heart. "You're not the first to wear that locket. Dig too deep, and you'll burn like she did." Elise's breath hitched. She glanced around, but the lobby was empty now, the janitor gone, the intern nowhere in sight. She tucked the note into her bag, her resolve hardening. The gala was hours away, and she would attend, not as a receptionist, but as someone trusted with Rose's story. She stood, smoothing her blouse, and headed to the suite to meet Margaret as promised. The older woman was waiting, a small velvet box in her lap. For tonight, she signed it and is handing it to Elise. Inside was a pearl hairpin, its delicate curve echoing the locket's rose. It was Rose's, Margaret signed. "Wear it with the locket, for courage." Elise's eyes stung, but she nodded, pinning the hairpin into her hair. As she left the suite, the lobby's lights dimmed, the gala's anticipation humming in the air. She didn't see Cassandra watching from the shadows, her phone glowing with a photo of Elise holding the velvet box. Her expression a mix of calculation and something darker. Elise Harper stepped out of the Sterling and Hart Tower into the late afternoon drizzle, her canvas bag slung over her shoulder, the weight of the locket and Rose's letter pressing against her side. The city hummed around her, car horns, the clatter of footsteps, the faint scent of wet asphalt mingling with her nerves. The gala was hours away, and the anonymous notes, "Careful, Elise, not every gift comes without strings," and "Dig too deep and you'll burn like she did," echoed in her mind, their warnings sharp as the pearl hairpin now tucked into her hair. Margaret Sterling's trust, the locket, the letter, and the mysterious rose all felt like pieces of a puzzle she was only beginning to grasp. Yet Julian Sterling's invitation to coffee, delivered with a quiet intensity, pulled her toward a moment she couldn't avoid. She crossed the street to a small cafe, its windows fogged with warmth, the bell above the door jingling softly as she entered. Julian sat in a corner booth, his charcoal suit jacket draped over the chair, his sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms. His storm gray eyes flicked up from his phone, softening as they met hers. "Elise," he said, standing, his voice low but warm. "You came." She slid into the booth, her blush-pink blouse catching the dim light. "You asked," she replied, her smile tentative but genuine. The waitress brought chamomile tea for her, black coffee for him, and the rain tapped the windows like a metronome, sealing them in a fragile bubble of quiet. Julian leaned forward, his hands clasped loosely around his cup. "I looked you up," he said, his tone matter-of-fact but his gaze searching. "No scandals, no headlines. Just a note from your old supervisor at the library, calling you the kindest person he'd ever worked with." Elise's cheeks warmed, and she sipped her tea to hide it. "I'm not trying to be anything special," she said, her voice soft but steady. "I try to see people." Julian's lips twitched, a faint smile breaking through his guarded exterior. "You saw my mother. That's more than most do." Elise set her cup down, her fingers brushing the locket in her pocket. "She's easy to see," she said. "She's kind but strong. Like she's carried a lot." Julian's gaze sharpened, as if her words had struck a nerve. "She has," he said, his voice quieter now. "More than I realized until recently." He paused, his eyes flicking to her bag, where the outline of the letter was faintly visible. "That letter from Rose, it stirred something in her, in me too." Elise's heart quickened. "What do you know about her?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Julian leaned back, the booth creaking softly. "Not enough. She was my mother's sister, who died in a fire when she was 24. My father never talked about her, and my mother. She only started singing about her after you showed up." His eyes held hers, a mix of curiosity and something more profound, like gratitude. "You're bringing things to the surface, Elise, things I didn't know were buried." She swallowed, the weight of Rose's letter. "If I'm gone, it wasn't an accident," pressing against her thoughts. "I didn't mean to," she said. "I just wanted to be kind." He smiled, small but real. "I didn't expect you," he admitted, his voice softening. "I thought I had everyone figured out. My staff, family, this company. But you're different." Elise's breath caught, the air charged with an unspoken question. She wanted to ask about the note signed by J.S., to confront the possibility that it was him, but his openness disarmed her. Before she could speak, his phone buzzed, its screen lighting up with a message. His jaw tightened as he read it, his expression shifting from warmth to steel. "I have to go," he said abruptly, standing. "Something's come up." Elise stood too, her tea half finished, her heart sinking. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her voice steady despite the unease creeping in. Julian paused, his eyes locking on hers, a flicker of regret beneath his resolve. "It will be. I'm sorry, Elise. I'll see you at the gala." He grabbed his jacket and left, the bell jingling as the door closed, leaving her alone with the rain and the locket's weight. Elise sat back down, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup. The cafe's warmth felt hollow now, the moment's intimacy shattered by his sudden departure. She pulled the locket from her pocket, opening it to study Rose's faded photo. The young woman's eyes, so like her own, seemed to hold a plea. "What happened to you?" Elise whispered, her voice lost in the cafe's hum. The anonymous notes, the letter, and the pressed rose all pointed to a profound truth, and she was now entangled in it, whether she wanted to be or not. As she left the cafe, the drizzle had thickened, soaking her shoes as she crossed back to the tower. The lobby was nearly empty, the gala preparations in full swing elsewhere. She returned to her desk, her bag heavier with the locket, the letter, and the pearl hairpin Margaret had given her. She opened her drawer to store them, but froze. Another envelope lay there, identical to the last, her name in sharp cursive. Her hands shook as she opened it. "You're not Rose, but you're walking her path. Stop before it's too late." The words hit like a slap, cold and precise. Elise scanned the lobby, her pulse racing. The janitor was gone, and the intern was nowhere in sight. She tucked the note into her bag, her resolve hardening. Whoever sent these warnings knew more than they were saying, and they were watching her. She pulled out Rose's letter again, rereading the haunting lines. "I loved someone I shouldn't have. The fire will come." The fire wasn't just a tragedy. It was a cover, a betrayal. And someone, maybe Cassandra Vale, perhaps someone closer, wanted it to stay buried. Her phone pinged with a text from an unknown number. "Check the archives. 1978 board minutes." Elise's breath hitched. She glanced at her computer, the company's internal database a few clicks away. She hesitated, knowing that digging deeper could pull her into a storm she wasn't ready for. But Margaret's trust, Rose's plea, and Julian's words, "I didn't expect you," pushed her forward. She logged in, her fingers trembling as she searched the 1978 records. A single entry appeared. Board meeting, June 12, 1978. Warehouse fire reported. 1 casualty. No further action. The brevity was chilling, a deliberate erasure. The elevator dinged and Cassandra Vale stepped out, her black dress replaced by a sharp blazer, her eyes locking on Elise like a hawk spotting prey. "You're still here," she said, her voice smooth but laced with venom. "Getting ready for your big night?" Elise stood, her chin lifting. "I was invited." Cassandra's smile was a blade. "Invitations can be rescinded." "You're playing with fire, Elise, and you don't even know it." She leaned closer, her voice dropping. Rose thought she could play too. Elise's heart pounded, but she held her ground. "I'm not playing," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I'm listening." Cassandra's smile faltered, just for a moment, before she turned and walked away, her heels echoing like a warning shot. Elise sat, her hands steadying as she slipped the locket around her neck, its silver cool against her skin. The gala was hours away, and she would face it not as a receptionist, but as someone carrying Rose's truth, a truth that was beginning to burn brighter than any warning could extinguish. Elise Harper stood in the Sterling and Hart lobby, the locket's silver rose glinting against her blush-pink blouse as the late afternoon light faded into a soft gray. The anonymous note, "You're not Rose, but you're walking her path. Stop, before it's too late," burned in her mind, its words a cold echo of the earlier warnings. Rose's letter, tucked in her bag, carried an even heavier weight. "If I'm gone, it wasn't an accident." The gala was mere hours away, and the air felt charged, as if the tower held its breath. Elise's fingers brushed the pearl hairpin Margaret Sterling had given her, now securing her hair, a quiet anchor amid the storm of secrets she was beginning to uncover. The lobby was nearly deserted, the weekend staff replaced by gala coordinators scurrying with clipboards and earpieces. Elise sat at her desk, her computer screen glowing with the sparse 1978 board minutes she'd found. Warehouse fire reported. 1 casualty. No further action. The brevity was a slap, a deliberate erasure of Rose Sterling's life. The text she'd received, "Check the archives." 1,978 board minutes had led her here, but it wasn't enough. She needed more, something to connect Rose's letter to the fire, to the man she'd loved, to the betrayal that ended her life. The elevator dinged and Margaret Sterling emerged, her wheelchair gliding smoothly under her aide's hands. Her silver hair caught the chandelier's light, and her pale green shawl was a soft contrast to the lobby's hard edges. Elise stood, her hands moving with practiced grace. "Good evening, Margaret," she signed, her smile steady despite the unease coiling in her chest. "Are you ready for the gala?" Margaret's eyes crinkled, and she signed back, "I'm ready." "But you look troubled." Elise hesitated, her fingers faltering. "I read Rose's letter. It's heavy." Margaret's expression softened, and she gestured to the private lounge. "Come, we need to talk." Elise followed, her bag slung over her shoulder, the locket warm against her skin. The lounge was a haven of orchids and soft light, the city's hum muted by thick glass. Margaret sat by a window, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes piercing. "You asked about Rose," she signed, her movements slow, deliberate. "She was my younger sister, my shield. She was deaf like me, but bolder. She loved a man she shouldn't have, one tied to this company. He promised her everything, then betrayed her." Elise's throat tightened. "The fire?" She sighed, her hands trembling. Margaret's eyes darkened, and she sighed. It wasn't an accident. Rose knew too much. She was going to expose him, his deals, his lies. The fire silenced her. Elise's heart pounded. Who was he? She sighed, but Margaret's hands paused, her gaze distant. "A powerful man. Close to our family. I never proved it, but I know." She reached into her shawl, pulled out a small, faded photograph and handed it to Elise. It showed Rose, vibrant in a simple dress, standing beside a man in a suit, his face partially obscured, but his posture familiar. Tall, commanding, like a younger version of Julian's father. Elise's breath caught. "Is this him?" she sighed, pointing to the man. Margaret nodded, her hands steady, but her eyes glistening. "He was on the board. He used her, then discarded her." Elise clutched the photo, its edges worn, the weight of Rose's story settling in her chest. Before she could ask more, the door swung open and Cassandra Vale strode in, her black blazer sharp as a blade, her eyes narrowing as they landed on the photograph. "What's this?" Cassandra asked, her voice smooth but edged with suspicion. Elise slipped the photo into her bag, her pulse racing. "Just a family picture," she said, her voice calm despite the lie. Cassandra's smile was thin, predatory. "Family pictures don't belong in boardroom discussions, Elise. You're getting too comfortable." Margaret signed quickly, and Elise translated aloud. "She says I'm here because she trusts me." Cassandra's eyes flicked to Margaret, then back to Elise. Trust is a dangerous game in this building. Before Elise could respond, Julian Sterling entered, shifting the room's gravity. His charcoal suit was immaculate, but his eyes carried a shadow of unease. "Mother," he said, signing simultaneously, "you're still here." His gaze landed on Elise, softening for a moment before hardening as he noticed Cassandra's tension. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice low but firm. Cassandra stepped forward, her heels clicking, reminding your receptionist where she stands. "The gala's tonight, Julian. We don't need distractions." Julian's jaw tightened. "The lease isn't a distraction. She's here at my mother's request." Cassandra's smile didn't waver, but her eyes were cold. "Of course, but reputations are fragile, especially yours." She turned to Elise, her voice dropping. "You're wearing that locket like it's a crown. Be careful, it's heavier than you think." The lease's hand brushed the locket, her resolve hardening. "I can carry it," she said, her voice quiet but unshakable. Julian stepped closer, his gaze flicking between the two women. "Enough, Cassandra. Focus on the gala." She nodded, her smile tight, and left, her heels echoing like a warning. Julian turned to Elise, his expression softer but guarded. "You don't have to do this," he said. "The gala, my mother's stories, it's a lot." Elise met his eyes, the locket warm against her chest. "I'm not here for you, Julian. I'm here for her. And for Rose." His lips twitched, a faint smile breaking through. "You're braver than you look." He paused, his eyes searching hers. "But be careful. Not everyone wants Rose's story told." Elise nodded, the anonymous notes flashing in her mind. As Julian left to prepare for the gala, Margaret signed, "Wear the locket tonight. Not for them, for you." Elise touched the silver rose. Its weight was a promise she couldn't ignore. Elise opened her bag at her desk and pulled out the photograph, studying the man beside Rose. His posture and suit were too close to images she'd seen of Julian's father, Victor Sterling, in old company photos. Her computer pinged with another anonymous email. "Look at the 1978 shareholder list. He's there." Her fingers trembled as she opened the database, scrolling to the 1978 records. The shareholder list was short, and there he was. Victor Sterling, board member, alongside a note about a warehouse deal approved just weeks before the fire. Her stomach churned. Rose's letter, fire, and betrayal all pointed to him. The lobby clock struck 5 p.m., and Elise stood, her decision made. She would attend the gala, not as a receptionist, but as someone carrying Rose's truth. She slipped the locket around her neck, its silver cool against her skin, and pinned the pearl hairpin more securely. As she gathered her things, a junior intern approached, nervous, holding a small envelope. "This was left for you," he said, his eyes darting away. Elise opened it, her heart sinking. "You're digging where you shouldn't. Rose burned. You will too." She tucked the note into her bag, her resolve steeling. The gala was a stage. She would walk onto it with Rose's letter and Margaret's trust as her armor. The rain had stopped as she left the lobby, but the air felt heavier, charged with the promise of revelations. Cassandra's earlier words echoed, "You're playing with fire," but Elise wasn't playing. She was listening, and tonight, She would ensure Rose's silence was finally heard. Elise Harper stood before her bedroom mirror, the sapphire gown hugging her frame like a second skin, its deep hue catching the soft glow of her apartment's single lamp. The silver locket with its rose engraving rested against her chest, a quiet promise to Margaret Sterling and a tether to Rose's untold story. The pearl hairpin gleamed in her chestnut hair, swept into loose waves that softened her features. Tonight's gala at the Sterling and Hart estate wasn't just an event, it was a stage. And Elise, the unassuming receptionist, was stepping into a spotlight she hadn't sought. Rose's letter, "If I'm gone, it wasn't an accident," and the anonymous threats, "You're digging where you shouldn't." Rose burned. You will, too, weighed on her. But Margaret's trust and Julian Sterling's quiet intensity pushed her forward. She arrived at the estate in a cab, her hands trembling as she smoothed the gown borrowed from a neighbor, a former costume designer. The Gothic iron gates loomed, lanterns casting flickering shadows along the sweeping driveway. Luxury cars lined the entrance, their drivers idling like silent sentinels. Elise stepped out, her breath catching at the grandeur. Stone arches, ivy-clad walls, and the distant hum of a string quartet. Her wobbly knees steadied as she reached the steps, where Julian Sterling waited, his midnight black tuxedo with a velvet lapel exuding an effortless elegance. His collar was open, a rare hint of vulnerability, and his storm-gray eyes swept over her, softening with something like awe. "You clean up well," he said, his voice low, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Elise's cheeks warmed, but she held his gaze. "You don't look so intimidating tonight." He offered his arm, his touch steady. "Give it 5 minutes." They entered the ballroom, a dazzling expanse of chandeliers and wine glasses, the quartet's waltz weaving through the air. Socialites and CEOs glided past, their gowns and cufflinks glittering with wealth. Elise felt every eye on her, the receptionist who didn't belong, yet Julian's arm anchored her, his presence a shield against the whispers already stirring. He led her to a quiet corner, away from the crowd's scrutiny. He said, "You don't have to dance," his voice gentle but his eyes searching. Elise tilted her head, the locket glinting under the lights. "Do you want to?" He paused, then nodded, a rare crack in his composed exterior. "Yes." She extended her hand, her pulse quickening. "Then, let's do something people don't expect." They stepped onto the dance floor, Julian's hand firm at her back, her sapphire gown swirling as they moved. Time slowed, the room's judgment fading as they spun in sync, surprisingly graceful. For a moment, Elise wasn't the receptionist, and Julian wasn't the CEO. Just two people finding rhythm in a world that rarely paused. The song ended, and the crowd's murmurs returned, sharper now. A voice cut through, loud and slurred. "You really think she's her, don't you?" Elise froze, Julian's hand tightening in hers. Cassandra Vale stood at the edge of the dance floor, a champagne flute in her hand, her silk gown clinging like a warning. Her smile was dangerous, her eyes glinting with too much wine. "You think the universe sent you a second chance," she said, stepping closer, her voice carrying over the quartet. Wrapped in sapphire and sign language, a perfect little fairy tale. The room stilled, heads turning, glasses pausing mid-sip. Julian's eyes darkened, his posture rigid. "Cassandra, stop." But she didn't, her voice rising. "You didn't mourn Rose, Julian. You buried her in legend, and now you're dressing up the past in this receptionist." Elise felt the eyes burning, the weight of the locket heavier than ever. She stepped forward, her voice soft but steady. "You can mock me, Cassandra. You can doubt me. But don't confuse love with legend." She touched the locket, its silver cool against her fingers. "I'm not trying to be Rose. I'm trying to honor her." The ballroom held its breath, the quartet's notes faltering. Cassandra's smile wavered, her champagne flute trembling. "Honor her," she spat, but her voice cracked, betraying a flicker of pain. "You don't know what you're stepping into." Julian moved to speak, but Elise touched his arm, stopping him. "Let's dance again," she whispered, her eyes locked on his. They stepped back onto the floor, the music resuming, slower now, a haunting waltz. The crowd watched, whispers stirring. but Elise and Julian moved as if alone, their steps a quiet defiance against Cassandra's venom. As they danced, Elise's mind raced. Rose's letter, the anonymous notes, and the 1978 shareholder list pointing to Victor Sterling all wove a tapestry of betrayal that she was only beginning to unravel. Cassandra's outburst wasn't just jealousy. It was personal, tied to Rose in a way Elise didn't yet understand. Julian's hand tightened at her waist, his voice low. "You didn't have to do that." Elise met his eyes, the locket warm against her chest. "I did. For your mother, for Rose." His gaze softened, a flicker of something more profound, gratitude, perhaps, or recognition. The dance ended, and the crowd dispersed, their whispers trailing like smoke. Cassandra had vanished, her champagne flute abandoned on a table. Julian led Elise to a balcony overlooking the estate's gardens, the night air cool against her skin. He said, "You changed the room tonight," his voice quiet but firm. "They'll talk, but they'll remember." Elise's lips curved into a small smile. "I didn't come here to be remembered. I came for Margaret." He nodded, his eyes searching hers. "And yet, you're here with me." Before she could respond, a waiter approached, nervous, holding a small envelope. "Miss Harper, this was left for you." Elise's heart sank as she took it, her name scrawled in the now familiar sharp cursive. Julian's brow furrowed. "Another one?" Elise nodded, opening it. Inside, a single line. "Rose's truth will burn you both. Leave it buried." She handed it to Julian, her hand steady despite the chill in her chest. He read it, his jaw tightening. "Someone's trying to scare you," he said. "They're not succeeding," Elise replied, her voice firm. He studied her, his expression a mix of admiration and concern. "You're braver than I expected." Elise touched the locket, its weight grounding her. "I'm not courageous, I'm just listening." Julian's hand brushed hers, a fleeting touch sending warmth through her. "Then keep listening," he said, "but be careful. Whoever's sending these knows more than they should." He glanced at the ballroom, where the crowd's eyes still lingered. "Stay close tonight." They returned to the gala, the quartet's music swelling as the night deepened. Elise felt the locket's weight, Rose's letter in her bag, the anonymous threats piling like stones. Cassandra's outburst had revealed a crack in the Sterling family's polished facade, and the notes suggested someone wanted it sealed shut. As she and Julian mingled, his arm a steady presence, she caught sight of Margaret across the room, her wheelchair near a grand piano, her smile radiant. Margaret signed to her, "You're doing well, keep going." Elise nodded, her resolve hardening. The gala's glamour faded against the truth she was uncovering: Rose's death, the fire, the man who betrayed her. Julian offered to escort her home as the night wound down, but she declined with a gentle smile. She said, "I must walk this off," stepping into the cool night air. The estate's lanterns flickered as she left, the locket gleaming under the stars, a beacon of a story she was determined to tell, no matter the cost. Elise Harper woke on Sunday morning, the sapphire gown from the gala folded over a chair in her small apartment, its deep hue catching the pale dawn light. The silver locket with its rose engraving hung around her neck, a constant reminder of Rose Sterling's story and the anonymous threats that shadowed it. Last night's dance with Julian Sterling lingered, his hand at her waist, his quiet, "You changed the room tonight," but so did Cassandra Vale's venomous outburst. "You think the universe sent you a second chance?" The latest note, slipped to her at the gala, "Rose's truth will burn you both. Leave it buried," sat on her bedside table, its words a cold weight. Rose's letter burned brighter in her bag. "If I'm gone, it wasn't an accident." Elise wore a simple white blouse and jeans. The locket and pearl hairpin were her only adornments. She needed answers, and Margaret Sterling's invitation to her private suite at Sterling and Hart promised a chance to find them. The city was quiet as she walked to the tower, the Sunday streets empty save for the occasional jogger and the hum of distant traffic. The lobby's marble gleamed under soft lights, the weekend stillness amplifying the weight of her steps. She took the elevator to the top floor, her bag heavy with Rose's letter and the faded photograph of Rose with a man who looked like Julian's father, Victor Sterling. Margaret waited in her suite, a sunlit haven of orchids and cream-colored walls. Her silver hair was pinned neatly, her pale blue shawl draped like a quiet crown. She smiled as Elise entered, signing with steady hands. You were radiant last night. Rose would have loved you. Elise's throat tightened, and she sighed. I read her letter. She said the fire wasn't an accident. Margaret's eyes darkened, but she nodded, gesturing to a chair. Elise sat, pulling the letter from her bag. Who was he? She sighed, her movements slow, deliberate. The man she loved. Margaret's hands moved with a heavy grace. His name was Victor Sterling, my father, Julian's father. Elise's breath caught, and the photograph's implications are now confirmed. Margaret continued. Rose was deaf, like me, but fearless. She worked in the company archives and found records of deals, shady ones. Victor promised to protect her, but he chose power instead. The fire silenced her. Elise clutched the letter, its words. I loved someone I shouldn't have, now searing. Did he know? She sighed, her hands trembling. Margaret's gaze was distant. I think he ordered it. I could never prove it. She handed Elise a yellowed folder, its edges worn. These are her notes. She hid them before she died. Elise opened it, finding pages of handwritten entries, dates, names, transactions, tied to a 1978 warehouse deal. One name stood out. Victor Sterling, approving funds for a project marked confidential. A note in Rose's script read, He's lying to the board. I'll tell them. Elise's heart pounded. This was why Rose died. The door opened, and Julian Sterling stepped in, his casual sweater and jeans contrasting with his usual suits. His storm gray eyes flicked to the folder, then to Elise, a question in his gaze. What's this? He asked, his voice low but sharp. Margaret signed, and Elise translated aloud. She says it's Rose's notes, evidence of what happened. Julian's jaw tightened, and he took the folder, scanning the pages. My father never spoke of her, he said, his voice strained. Why now? Elise stood, the locket warm against her chest. Because someone's trying to bury it. She pulled the latest anonymous note from her bag and handed it to him. This was left at the gala. Julian read it, his expression darkening. Rose's truth will burn you both. He looked at Elise, then at his mother. Who's sending these? Margaret signed. Someone who knows, someone scared. Julian's hand tightened on the folder. Cassandra? Before Elise could respond, Cassandra Vale entered, her tailored blazer as sharp as her gaze. Julian, we need to prep for tomorrow's board meeting, she said, her eyes flicking to the folder. What's that? Elise's pulse raced, but she held her ground. Old records, she said, her voice calm despite the lie. Cassandra's smile was thin. You're digging into dangerous things, Elise. Family secrets don't stay secret without reason. Julian stepped forward, his voice low, lethal. Enough, Cassandra. If you know something, say it. Cassandra's composure faltered, her eyes darting to the folder. I know you're letting a receptionist play detective, she said, her voice sharp. It isn't suitable for optics, Julian, especially after last night. Elise's cheeks flushed, but she spoke softly. I'm not playing, I'm listening to Rose. Cassandra's laugh was sharp, but her eyes held a flicker of fear. Rose is dead. Let her stay that way. She turned and left, her heels echoing like a warning shot. Julian turned to Elise, his expression a mix of frustration and resolve. You don't have to do this, he said. This isn't your fight. Elise met his eyes, the locket grounding her. It's not about fighting, it's about truth. She handed him the photograph of Rose and his father. This was in Margaret's things. It's him. Julian studied it, his face paling. I didn't know, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. He never talked about her. Margaret signed, her hands steady. He buried her to protect himself. But you can unbury her. Julian's gaze shifted to Elise, a flicker of gratitude in his eyes. He said, You're making me see things I didn't want to. Elise's lips curved into a small smile. Sometimes seeing hurts. He nodded, setting the folder down. Stay close today. Whoever's sending these notes isn't playing. Elise returned to her desk, the lobby now bustling with gala cleanup crews. She opened her computer, searching the 1978 archives again. This time for Victor Sterling's board activities. A single entry caught her eye. June 10, 1978. V. Sterling approved warehouse expansion. Funding source undisclosed. 2 days later, the fire. Her stomach churned. She printed the page, tucking it with Rose's notes into her bag. As she did, another envelope slid under her notepad, her name in that sharp cursive. Her hands shook as she opened it. "You're too close. Stop, or you'll end up like her." Her breath hitched. She scanned the lobby, but no one met her gaze. The janitor was sweeping, the intern sorting files, their movements too ordinary to suspect. She tucked the note away, her resolve hardening. Whoever was sending these knew Rose's truth and feared its exposure. She glanced at the clock, 2 p.m. Margaret had asked her to return to the suite before leaving, and Elise needed to know more. She took the elevator, the folder, and her locket armor. In the suite, Margaret sat by the window, a small velvet box in her lap. "She signed it for you and is handing it to Elise." Inside was a silver bracelet, its delicate rose charm matching the locket. "Rose wore this," Margaret signed. "It's yours now." Elise's eyes stung, but she clasped it on her wrist. "Why me?" she sighed. Margaret's smile was soft. "Because you hear what others ignore." As Elise left, Cassandra passed her in the hall, her eyes flicking to the bracelet. "Another gift?" she said, her voice low. "You're collecting ghosts, Elise. Be careful, they haunt." Elise didn't flinch. "I'm not afraid of ghosts," she said, her voice steady. "I'm so scared of silence." Cassandra's smile froze, leaving Elise with the locket, the bracelet, and a truth beginning to burn brighter than any threat could dim. Elise Harper stood in the Sterling and Hart lobby, the weight of the silver locket and rose-charmed bracelet pressing against her skin as the Monday morning bustle began. The weekend's revelations, Rose Sterling's letter, the photograph of her with Victor Sterling, and Margaret's haunting confirmation that the 1978 fire was no accident, churned in her mind. The anonymous notes, the latest warning her to stop or end like her, felt like a tightening noose. Yet the locket, now paired with the bracelet Margaret had given her, was a tether to Rose's truth. A truth Elise was determined to uncover, no matter the cost. The gala's spotlight had faded, but Cassandra Vale's venomous words, "You're collecting ghosts," lingered, hinting at a deeper connection to Rose's death. The lobby hummed with activity, executives in crisp suits, assistants darting with coffee trays, the air sharp with ambition. In a simple white blouse and navy skirt, Elise sat at her desk, her computer screen open to the 1978 archives. The sparse board minutes and shareholder list pointed to Victor Sterling, Julian's father, as the man who betrayed Rose. Her notes, hidden in Elise's bag, detailed his shady deals, and her letter, "The fire will come," was a plea for justice. Elise's fingers trembled as she typed, searching for more, when a shadow fell over her desk. Cassandra Vale stood there, her tailored blazer as sharp as her gaze, a black folder in her hand. "You're early," she said, her voice smooth but laced with disdain. "Digging again?" Elise met her eyes, her resolve steady despite the knot in her chest. "Just doing my job," she said, her tone calm but firm. Cassandra's smile was a blade. "Your job is answering phones, not playing historian." She leaned closer, her voice dropping. "You're stirring things that don't concern you, Elise. Stop before you regret it." Elise's hand brushed the locket, its silver grounding her. "I'm not stirring," she said softly. "I'm listening." Cassandra's eyes narrowed, but before she could respond, the elevator dinged and Julian Sterling stepped out, his graphite suit impeccable, his storm-gray eyes scanning the lobby. He paused, his gaze locking on Elise, a flicker of concern breaking his composed exterior. "Elise," he said, his voice low, "can I see you in my office?" Cassandra's smile tightened, but she stepped back, her folder clutched like a shield. Elise followed Julian to his office, a sleek space of glass and cedar, the city skyline sprawling beyond the windows. He closed the door, his posture tense, and turned to her, holding the faded photograph of Rose and his father. "I couldn't sleep after seeing this," he said, his voice strained. "My mother told me about Rose, but it's proof." Elise nodded, pulling Rose's notes from her bag. "She wrote about his deals," she said, handing him the folder. She was going to expose him. Julian scanned the pages, his jaw tightening as he read Rose's hurried script. "Victor's lying to the board. The warehouse deal is dirty." He set the folder down, his eyes meeting Elise's. Why didn't she tell anyone? Elise hesitated, then pulled out Rose's letter, its words searing. She did. She wrote this. She read aloud. I loved someone I shouldn't have. He chose power over me. Julian's face paled. My father. Before he could say more, the door swung open and Cassandra strode in, uninvited, her eyes blazing. I told you to stop digging, she snapped, her gaze flicking to the folder. You're both fools if you think you can rewrite history. Julian stepped forward, his voice low, lethal. Cassandra, if you know something, say it now. She laughed, bitter and sharp. You want the truth? Rose was my mother. Elise's breath caught, the room tilting. Julian froze, his eyes narrowing. What? Cassandra's composure cracked, her voice trembling with suppressed pain. She was my mother. She loved your father, Julian. They were together for years, but he was married to your mother. When Rose found out about his deals, money laundering through the warehouse, she threatened to expose him. He silenced her with the fire. She turned to Elise, her eyes glistening. You're wearing her locket, her bracelet, like you're her ghost. But you're just a receptionist who got lucky. Elise's heart pounded, but she held her ground. I'm not trying to be her, she said, her voice steady. I'm trying to give her justice. Cassandra's laugh was hollow. Justice? The Sterlings buried her to protect their name. You think they'll let you dig her up? Julian's voice cut through, cold and firm. If my father did this, I need to know. He turned to Elise, his eyes softening. And I trust her to help me. Cassandra's face twisted, a mix of grief and fury. You trust her? A nobody who's been here 3 months? She stepped closer, her voice dropping. I spent my life in this company, proving myself, knowing I was Rose's daughter but never acknowledged. And you, she jabbed a finger at Elise, you waltz in, sign a few words and get handed her legacy? Elise's hand brushed the locket, her resolve unwavering. I didn't ask for this, she said, but Rose deserves to be heard. Julian placed a hand on Elise's arm, his touch steadying. Cassandra, if you're her daughter, why didn't you tell me? Her eyes filled, but she straightened. Because your family would have crushed me. Your father made sure I was invisible. She turned to leave, then paused, her voice softening. I sent the notes, Elise. I wanted you to stop, to save yourself, but you're too stubborn. She walked out, the door clicking shut, leaving a silence heavy with truth. Julian turned to Elise, his expression a mix of shock and determination. She's been here all this time, and I never knew. He picked up the folder, his hand steady despite the tremor in his voice. My father. I need to know what he did. Elise nodded, her heart aching for him. She said, we'll find out together, her voice soft but firm. For Rose, for your mother. He looked at her, a flicker of gratitude in his eyes. You're not what I expected, Elise. They sat at his desk, poring over Rose's notes and the 1978 archives. A board memo mentioned a confidential payment to a third party days before the fire, signed by Victor Sterling. Elise's finger traced the line, her mind racing. This could be the proof, she said. Julian nodded, his jaw tight. But we need more. If Cassandra's telling the truth, there's a paper trail. He stood, pacing to the window. I'll call legal. We need to dig deeper, quietly. Elise's phone pinged, and another anonymous text said, You've gone too far. The truth won't save you. Her breath hitched, but she showed it to Julian. His eyes darkened. Someone else knows, he said, or Cassandra's not done. Elise tucked the phone away, her resolve hardening. I'm not stopping, she said, touching the locket. Rose didn't. Julian's gaze softened, and he stepped closer. Then we do this together, but be careful, Elise. This is bigger than we thought. As she left his office, the lobby felt sharper, the air charged with unseen eyes. She slipped Rose's notes and the photograph into her bag, the locket and bracelet her armor. Cassandra's confession had cracked open the past, but the anonymous threats suggested someone else was guarding it. Elise returned to her desk, her heart steady despite the storm brewing. She would face it, for Rose, for Margaret, and for the truth that refused to stay buried. Elise Harper sat at her desk in the Sterling and Hart lobby, the Monday morning light filtering through the towering glass windows, casting sharp shadows across the marble floor. The silver locket and rose-charmed bracelet gleamed against her white blouse, silent anchors to Rose Sterling's truth. Cassandra Vale's confession, Rose was my mother, and the revelation that Victor Sterling, Julian's father, had orchestrated the 1978 fire to silence her, had shattered the company's polished facade. Rose's letter, her notes, and the photograph linking her to Victor were now in Elise's bag, each piece a spark in a growing blaze. The latest anonymous text, "You've gone too far. The truth won't save you," sat heavy in her mind, its sender unknown but their intent clear: to bury Rose's story again. The lobby buzzed with the usual Monday energy, executives striding with purpose, assistants juggling schedules, the air thick with ambition. Elise's computer screen glowed with the 1978 archives, the sparse board minutes, and Victor's confidential payment memo hinting at a cover-up. Her heart raced as she cross-referenced Rose's notes, which detailed a warehouse deal tied to money laundering. She was close to proof, but the anonymous threats felt like a tightening grip, warning her to stop. Yet Margaret Sterling's trust and Julian's resolve, "We do this together," pushed her forward. The elevator dinged, and Julian Sterling emerged, his graphite suit crisp, but his storm-gray eyes shadowed with sleeplessness. He paused at Elise's desk, his voice low. "We need to talk. Boardroom, now." Elise nodded, slipping Rose's notes and the photograph into her bag, the locket warm against her chest. As they rode the elevator, Julian's silence was heavy, his hands clasped tightly. "Cassandra's resignation came this morning," he said finally. "She's gone, but she left something for you." He handed her a small envelope, her name scrawled in Cassandra's sharp cursive. Elise opened it, her pulse quickening. Inside, a single line: "You won because you didn't fight. Tell her story." Her throat tightened. Cassandra's departure wasn't an end, but a shift, her confession a crack in the Sterling legacy that others might want sealed. The air was cold in the boardroom, the long table lined with executives whose eyes flicked to Elise with guarded curiosity. Julian stood at the head, a projector screen behind him. He said, "We're addressing something today," his voice steady, but edged with steel. A truth this company buried. He clicked a remote, and the photograph of Rose and Victor Sterling appeared, her vibrant smile stark against his stern posture. The room stirred, murmurs rising. "Rose Sterling," Julian said, "was my aunt, my mother's sister. She died in a 1978 fire, and it wasn't an accident." He projected Rose's notes, her hurried script detailing Victor's shady deals. "My father approved a warehouse project tied to illegal funds. Rose found out and was silenced." The executives shifted, their faces a mix of shock and unease. Elise stood quietly by the coffee tray, her heart pounding as Julian told the truth. He continued, "I'm establishing the Rose Sterling Foundation to fund deaf education and advocacy. Elise Harper will be its ambassador." Her breath caught, the room's eyes turning to her. She touched the locket, its weight grounding her, and nodded, her voice soft but firm. "I'm honored to help." The CFO, an older man with kind eyes, spoke up. "This is bold, Julian, but it's right. We'll support it." Others nodded, some reluctantly, but the air shifted. A reckoning had begun. Cassandra's absence hung heavy, her resignation a silent admission of defeat. But as the meeting ended, Elise's phone pinged with another anonymous text. "The fire wasn't the end. Look closer." Her stomach churned. She showed it to Julian, who frowned, his jaw tight. "Someone else knows," he said. "We need to find the payment records." Elise nodded, her resolve hardening. "I'll recheck the archives." Julian placed a hand on her arm, his touch steady. "Be careful, Elise. This isn't over." Back at her desk, Elise dove into the archives, her fingers flying over the keyboard. She found a 1978 ledger entry. Payment of $500,000 to J. Harrow, consultant. Approved by V. Sterling. No further details, but the name stood out, unfamiliar, a ghost in the records. She printed it, tucking it into her bag with Rose's notes. As she worked, Margaret wheeled into the lobby, her aide at her side. Elise signed. Julian told them about Rose. "He's starting a foundation." Margaret's eyes glistened, and she sighed, "You gave her peace, thank you." Elise's heart swelled, but the anonymous text gnawed at her. "There's more," she signed. "Someone's still hiding something." Margaret's hands paused, then moved slowly. "Be careful. The past protects itself." Elise nodded, The locket and bracelet were her armor. She returned to her desk, the lobby's hum fading as she focused. The name J. Harrow tugged at her, a thread begging to be pulled. She searched the company's historical staff records, finding a John Harrow, a low-level accountant in 1978, dismissed shortly after the fire. No reason given. Her pulse quickened. Another piece of the puzzle. As the day wound down, Elise prepared to leave, her bag heavy with evidence. The lobby was quiet, the executives gone, the air thick with the weight of the morning's revelations. She opened her drawer to grab her coat and froze. Another envelope lay there, her name in sharp cursive. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Harrow knows, find him, or you're next. The words hit like ice, sharp and cold. She scanned the lobby, but it was empty, the janitor's broom silent, the intern long gone. Elise tucked the note away, her resolve steeling. She texted Julian, saying she had found a name, John Harrow, and tied to the payment. His reply was instant. Meet me tomorrow, we'll track him. She slipped the locket into her pocket, its weight a reminder of Rose's courage. As she left the tower, the city's dusk wrapped around her, the skyline glowing gold. She passed a street violinist, his melody haunting, and dropped a few coins into his case. He looked up, whispering, "Thank you." Elise smiled. "You remind me of someone." At home, she sat on her bed, the locket and bracelet glinting in the lamplight. She opened Rose's notes again, cross-referencing the payment to Harrow. A scribbled line caught her eye. Harrow saw the books. He helped hide it. Her heart raced. Harrow wasn't just a bystander. He was complicit. She searched online, finding an old address for a John Harrow in a nearby town, now in his 70s. It was a lead, fragile, but real. Elise's phone pinged again. Don't go alone. No sender, but the tone felt different, almost protective. Was it Julian, or someone else watching her? She texted him again. Harrow's alive. I have an address. His reply was swift. Wait for me. Tomorrow. She nodded to herself, the locket warm in her hand. The truth was close, but so was the danger. She pinned the pearl hairpin into her hair, a silent vow to Rose and Margaret. As she turned off the lamp, the city's hum filled the silence. A reminder that the past was waking. Elise wasn't just a receptionist anymore. She was a keeper of secrets. And tomorrow, she and Julian would face the man who might hold the final piece of Rose's story. A piece that could either free them or burn everything down. Elise Harper woke to the soft hum of her apartment, the dawn light filtering through thin curtains, casting a pale glow on the silver locket and rose-charmed bracelet resting on her bedside table. The weight of Rose Sterling's truth pressed against her. Victor Sterling's betrayal, the 1978 fire, Cassandra Vale's confession, and the anonymous threats warning her to stop. The latest lead, John Harrow, an accountant tied to a mysterious payment approved by Victor, was a fragile thread to the past. The note Harrow knows, find him, or you're next, sat heavy in her mind. Its urgency matched Julian Sterling's text, wait for me, tomorrow. Today was that tomorrow, and Elise felt the pull of a truth she couldn't ignore. She dressed in a simple gray sweater and jeans, the locket around her neck, the bracelet on her wrist, and the pearl hairpin securing her chestnut hair. Rose's letter, her notes, and the photograph of her with Victor were tucked in her bag, alongside the printed 1978 ledger entry naming John Harrow. Elise's heart raced as she stepped into the crisp morning, the city waking slowly around her. She took a cab to Sterling and Hart, where Julian waited in the lobby, his casual jacket and jeans starkly contrasting to his usual suits, his storm gray eyes scanning her with quiet intensity. "You're sure about this?" he asked, his voice low as they stood by her desk. Elise nodded, pulling out the address she'd found for Harrow, a small house in Willow Creek, an hour's drive from the city. "He's our link to the truth," she said, her voice steady despite the knot in her chest. Julian's jaw tightened, but he gestured to the glass doors. "Let's go, I'm driving." They left in his silver SUV, the city fading into rolling hills as they headed toward Willow Creek, a thermos of chamomile tea between them, its warmth a small comfort against the unknown. The drive was initially quiet, and the engine's hum filled the space. Elise stared out the window, memories of her own past surfacing. "I grew up in Willow Creek," she said, her voice soft. My grandmother raised me after my mother left. She taught me sign language and worked at a school for deaf students. Julian glanced at her, his hands steady on the wheel. She sounds like a remarkable woman. Elise smiled faintly. She was. She said silence was just another language to learn. Julian's lips twitched, a rare softness breaking through. She'd like my mother. They arrived in Willow Creek as the sun climbed higher, the town a sleepy cluster of porches and oak trees. Elise guided Julian to a quiet street, where a small white house with a blue door stood, its paint peeling but its garden tidy. "This is it," she said, her heart pounding. They stepped out, the air thick with the scent of grass and memory. Elise paused, her fingers brushing the locket. "This is where I grew up, too," she admitted. Julian's eyes softened. "I didn't picture you here." She smiled, bittersweet. "Neither did I, until now." They knocked, and an older man opened the door, his face weathered, his eyes sharp despite his 70 years. "John Harrow?" Julian asked, his voice firm but polite. The man nodded, wary. "Who's asking?" Elise stepped forward, the locket gleaming. "We're here about Rose Sterling, the 1978 fire." Harrow's face paled, and he gestured them inside, his hands trembling. The house smelled of old wood and coffee, its walls lined with faded photographs. They sat in a cramped living room, a single lamp casting shadows. "I knew this day would come," Harrow said, his voice gravelly. Rose was in trouble, not because she wanted to be, but because she saw too much. Elise pulled out Rose's notes, handing them to him. She wrote about a warehouse deal. "You were paid to hide it." Harrow's eyes darted to the pages, then away. "Victor Sterling was my boss," he said. "He cooked the books and laundered money through the warehouse. Rose found out and threatened to go to the board. He told me to make it disappear." Julian leaned forward, his voice low, lethal. "And the fire?" Harrow's hands shook as he sipped his coffee. "I didn't start it, but I knew it was coming. Victor paid me to keep quiet, then fired me after." Elise's heart raced, the locket heavy against her chest. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" she asked. Harrow's laugh was bitter. "You think I'd live to 70 if I had? The Sterlings owned this town." Elise pulled out the photograph of Rose and Victor, placing it on the table. "This is her, with him." Harrow's eyes widened, then softened. She was kind, too kind for this family. He paused, his voice dropping. "There's more. Victor kept a ledger, hidden in the old estate. If it's still there, it's got everything, names, dates, payments." Julian's jaw tightened. "Where?" Harrow shrugged, weary. "The library, maybe." He liked his secrets close. As they left, Elise's mind spun. The ledger was a key, but the estate was vast, its library a maze of history. They drove to the cemetery where Elise's grandmother was buried, a quiet detour she'd requested. The headstone, etched with a rose, stopped her cold. It matched the locket's engraving. "My grandmother knew Rose," Elise whispered, her fingers tracing the stone. Julian stood beside her, his presence steady. "What was her name?" he asked. "Lila Harper," Elise said. "She taught at the deaf school." A groundskeeper approached, his face weathered like Harrow's. "You're Lila's girl," he said, his voice soft. "She left something for you years ago." He handed Elise a small metal box, rusted but intact. Inside was a journal, its pages yellowed, in Lila's neat script. "Rose Sterling came to me in 78, it read. She was scared, and Victor was dangerous. I told her to hide her notes. The fire took her before she could." Elise's throat tightened. "She knew," she said, her voice breaking. Julian's hand brushed hers, warm and grounding. "She trusted you to find this." They returned to the SUV, the journal heavy in Elise's bag. The drive back was silent, but not tense, a shared resolve binding them. They headed to the library at the Sterling estate, a cavernous room of oak shelves and dust motes. Elise scanned the shelves, her fingers trailing over leather-bound books, while Julian searched a locked cabinet. He said, pulling out a small ledger, its pages brittle. Inside, Victor's handwriting listed payments to J. Harrow, $500,000, and a silence fee. Elise's heart pounded. "This is it," she said. "Proof." As they left the estate, the sky darkened, rain threatening. Elise's phone pinged. "You found it. Now stop, or you'll lose more than Rose did." Her breath hitched, and she showed it to Julian. His eyes darkened. "We're close," he said. too close for them to let us go. Elise nodded. The locket and bracelet were her armor. Then we keep going, she said, her voice steady. They drove back to the city, the ledger and journal in her bag, the truth burning brighter than any threat. Elise sat with the journal at her apartment, reading Lila's final entry. Rose was a light. Protect her story, Elise. She touched the locket, vowing to do just that, as the city's hum carried her toward a reckoning she was ready to face. Elise Harper stood in the quiet of her apartment, the dawn light filtering through her curtains, casting a soft glow on the silver locket and rose-charmed bracelet resting on her bedside table. The weight of Rose Sterling's truth had carried her through a whirlwind. Victor Sterling's betrayal, the 1978 fire that killed Rose, Cassandra Vale's confession as her daughter, and John Harrow's admission of his role in hiding the crime. The ledger, found in the Sterling Estates library, was the final piece. Victor's handwritten records of payments, including one to Harrow for silence. The anonymous threats, "You found it, now stop or you'll lose more than Rose did," had only strengthened Elise's resolve. Today, Julian Sterling would unveil the Rose Sterling Foundation, and Elise, no longer just a receptionist, would stand beside him, carrying Rose's legacy into the light. She was dressed in a simple ivory dress. The locket and bracelet were her only adornments, and the pearl hairpin secured her chestnut hair. Rose's journal, her grandmother Lila's notes, and the ledger were in her bag, each page a testament to a truth too long buried. The city hummed as she took a cab to Sterling and Hart, the tower's glass facade gleaming under the morning sun. Julian waited in the lobby, his black suit tailored but unpretentious, his storm-gray eyes softening as they met hers. "You ready?" he asked, his voice low but steady. Elise nodded, touching the locket. For Rose, for Margaret. They rode the elevator to the top-floor boardroom, where a small press conference was set. The room buzzed with reporters, board members, and staff, their eyes flicking to Elise with curiosity and skepticism. Margaret Sterling sat in the front, her wheelchair angled toward the podium, her silver hair pinned neatly, her pale blue shawl a quiet elegance. Her smile, radiant and proud, steadied Elise's nerves. Julian stepped to the podium, his presence commanding silence, and began, his voice clear and unwavering. "My father, Victor Sterling, built this company," he said, "but he left a complicated legacy." He clicked a remote, projecting the photograph of Rose with Victor, her vibrant smile stark against his stern posture. "Rose Sterling, my aunt, died in a 1978 fire. It wasn't an accident." Gasps rippled through the room as he displayed Rose's notes and the ledger, detailing Victor's money laundering scheme. She found his secrets and was silenced for it. Today we honor her by facing the truth. Elise stood a few steps behind, her heart pounding but her posture steady. Julian's gaze flicked to her, a flicker of warmth beneath his resolve. "The Rose Sterling Foundation will fund deaf education and advocacy," he continued. "Elise Harper, who reminded us what listening means, will be its ambassador." The room stirred, cameras clicking, but Elise focused on Margaret, who signed. "You're her voice now." Elise's throat tightened, and she nodded, the locket warm against her chest. The press asked sharp questions. Why now? What about the company's reputation? But Julian answered with calm precision, his honesty disarming. "We can't change the past, but we can build a future that honors it." As the conference ended, the board's CFO approached Elise, his eyes kind. "You've done something remarkable," he said. "This company needed this." Elise smiled, soft but certain. "Rose did it. I just listened." Back at her desk, the lobby felt different, lighter, as if the truth had lifted a shadow. But as Elise sorted the day's mail, a final envelope caught her eye, her name in sharp cursive. Her pulse quickened as she opened it. "You've won, but the past never sleeps. Watch your back." No signature, but the tone felt final, less a threat than a warning from someone who'd lost their fight. She'd tucked it away, her resolve unshaken. The sender, perhaps a lingering ally of Victor's, couldn't stop what had begun. Julian approached, his jacket off, sleeves rolled up, a rare ease in his posture. "He said you didn't have to stand up," leaning against her desk, "but I'm glad you did." Elise met his eyes, the locket gleaming. "I did it for Margaret. And Rose." He nodded, his gaze softening. "And maybe a little for me." Her smile was small but real. Maybe. He handed her a folded note, his handwriting neat. Meet me in the garden tonight. We need to finish this. Her heart skipped, but she nodded, sensing the weight of his words. That evening, the Sterling Estates garden was a wild tapestry of lavender and lilies, the air soft with dusk. Elise wore her ivory dress, and the locket and bracelet caught the fading light. Julian waited under an ivy arch, his black suit replaced by a simple shirt, the rose-shaped pin from her grandmother Lila glinting on his lapel.
"You kept it," she said, her voice soft. He smiled, rare and unguarded. "It's a promise." He pulled a sheet of music from his pocket, its pages yellowed. Rose wrote this, Lily in the rain. She never finished it. Elise traced the final bar, blank and waiting. She wrote it for him, didn't she? Julian nodded, his eyes distant. Before he betrayed her, he handed her a pen. "Will you finish it with me?" Elise's throat tightened, but she nodded, writing a single note, a soft, hopeful chord that felt like closure. They stood in silence, the gardens hummed their only music, until Julian spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I love you, Elise. Not because you're Rose, but because you're you." Her breath caught, and she met his eyes, the locket warm against her heart. "I'm scared," she admitted. "So am I," he said, stepping closer. "But I'm certain." She took his hand, their fingers intertwining, and they kissed. Gentle, steady, a promise not of fairy tales but of truth. The garden seemed to hold its breath, the lilies nodding in approval. Elise and Julian married under soft clouds and rustling leaves in that same garden a year later. No chandeliers, just 60 chairs, chamomile tea, and a string quartet playing Lily in the Rain. Its final note hers. Margaret sat in the front, the locket pinned to her shawl, her smile radiant through tears. She signed, "It belongs to the one who listens." Elise wore an off-white dress, wildflowers in her hair, and held a letter from her grandmother Lila, found after her death. "One day, someone will listen to you. Don't be afraid to speak." They served grilled cheese and tomato soup at the reception, a nod to the night in Willow Creek when Elise shared her past. Cassandra, now softer, approached with a gift, a fountain pen engraved with "Begin." "It was my mother's," she said. "She wanted to write. Maybe you can." Elise's eyes misted. "I will," she whispered, promising to tell Rose's story. 5 years later, Elise Monroe Sterling's novel, The Rose That Listened, became a quiet bestseller. Its opening line, a testament: "Kindness is the loudest rebellion." Each book she wrote carried a pressed lily, a nod to Rose, left on windowsills and worn over hearts. Julian, now leading Sterling and Hart with transparency, wore the rose pin every gala night, a promise to speak his truth. The foundation thrived, funding schools for deaf students, with Elise as its voice. The anonymous threats faded, their sender lost to the past, but Elise never forgot the cost of listening. As she sat at her desk, pen in hand, she wrote for Rose, Fila, and Margaret, a legacy not of power but courage, blooming in silence.